When most of us picture manipulation, we usually imagine something obvious, right? A blatant lie, a direct threat, something so in your face that anyone paying attention could just spot it immediately. But in this explainer, we're going to look at something far more insidious. Because the absolute most powerful forms of manipulation, they don't attack your reality directly. They slowly, quietly reshape it. It's not about force or intimidation. It's about a slow drip of confusion. It's the subtle emotional pressure that builds and builds until one day you find yourself questioning something you knew with absolute certainty. And that is exactly what makes gaslighting so deeply unsettling. It doesn't just try to control your behavior, it literally hacks the mechanism you use to figure out what is real.
Just imagine waking up tomorrow morning, and suddenly every single memory you have is up for debate. Every observation, every gut feeling, every way you interpret the world around you is just constantly being second-guessed. Someone is repeatedly looking you in the eye and telling you that what you saw didn't happen, what you heard wasn't actually said, and what you felt, completely invalid. Now, at first, you'd resist, wouldn't you? You trust yourself. But as we're about to see, we human beings have this fundamental vulnerability hardwired right into our psychology.
The core of that vulnerability comes down to one really uncomfortable truth. We don't actually experience reality directly. We experience it through interpretation. Our grip on reality is incredibly subjective. We aren't these perfectly objective robotic recording devices, we are emotional interpreters. Our memories, they're flawed. Our perceptions are highly selective. And because our reality is ultimately just an interpretation, it means it can be influenced, it can be distorted, and in the wrong hands, it can be completely rewritten.
Let's look at Section 1, the architecture of doubt, and exactly how the mind gets hijacked.
So how does your brain actually determine what's real in the first place? Well, it essentially boils down to a clinical concept called social validation. Since we were kids, we've learned what's normal by constantly comparing our own experiences with the people around us. When what we see aligns with everyone else, boom, our confidence grows. When it doesn't, uncertainty creeps in. Now, most of the time, this is a great thing. It's how humans cooperate and build societies. But it leaves a psychological backdoor wide open. Because we are so hardwired to seek consensus, if someone consistently, repeatedly challenges your perception, it creates a terrifying vulnerability.
Think about it. If someone is standing there looking perfectly calm, totally confident, and absolutely certain while telling you that you're wrong, your brain naturally asks a really dangerous question. What if they're right? And the wild part is, your brain doesn't ask this because there's actual evidence you're wrong. It asks it because we're biologically programmed to want to agree. Your internal reality is suddenly forced to compete with their external certainty. And unfortunately, to the human brain, absolute certainty is often way more persuasive than the actual truth.
This kind of manipulation rarely starts with fireworks, It starts with these tiny, almost invisible moments, a forgotten conversation, a denied promise, a dismissed emotion. You bring up a totally valid concern and they confidently brush it off, saying you're overreacting or just misremembering. On their own, each of these incidents feels so small. They're easy to rationalize, easy to dismiss, but our psychology accumulates these things. These tiny, insignificant moments start to stack up, creating this exhausting cognitive load. Before you know it, you're constantly replaying conversations, obsessing over little details, and deeply questioning your own memory.
That leads us into Section 2, the paradox of confusion, and the massive toll this takes on the human mind.
Here's the thing about the human brain. It desperately craves coherence. We absolutely need our experiences to make sense. We want people to act predictably, and we need reality to feel stable. So, when reality suddenly becomes inconsistent, your brain essentially goes into overdrive trying to fix it. You start spending countless hours trying to solve impossible contradictions, and this mentally drains you. It completely exhausts you. While all your energy is going toward fixing this confusion, the actual manipulation continues completely unnoticed. Your psychological anchors get weakened. And frankly, a confident person is incredibly hard to control. But a confused, totally exhausted person, they're much, much easier to influence.
And right here is where we hit the most twisted paradox of gaslighting. Because the victim becomes so completely uncertain of everything, they desperately need an anchor. They need clarity. And who do they end up turning to? The exact same person who so confidently tells them what is real. The very source of their confusion magically morphs into their one and only source of validation. It's a tragic psychological transition, and the scariest part is that most people never even notice it happening. But once it does, the trap is locked firmly in place.
Let's unpack how that works in Section 3, the cycle of dependency, and why victims actually stay.
The emotional conditioning here follows a really predictable and devastating timeline. It kicks off in Phase 1 with intense psychological distress, all that doubt we just talked about.
Then, in phase 2, the totally exhausted person starts desperately chasing clarity. They just want emotional stability back. Then comes phase 3, where the manipulator suddenly offers temporary reassurance. Just a brief moment of comfort that temporarily stops the bleeding, so to speak. Finally, in phase 4, this constant back and forth between pain and comfort creates an incredibly powerful attachment. The manipulator literally becomes wired into the victim's brain as the source of both their suffering and their relief. It traps them in a cycle that completely defies pure logic, making it almost impossible to see clearly from the inside looking out.
Now, let's zoom out for section 4, the modern reality distortion, how this plays out across society and the media.
Because this isn't just about one-on-one relationships anymore. Think about social media for a second. Every single day, millions of us are comparing our messy, authentic, behind-the-scenes private lives to carefully edited, highly polished public performances. You sit there feeling inadequate, scrolling through endless digital proof that everyone else out there is somehow happier, better looking, and way more successful. Gradually, slowly, your own real-life experience actually starts to feel less trustworthy than the glowing images on your phone screen. Reality loses its authority. In a way, you are literally outsourcing your perception to a feed.
And modern algorithms, they effortlessly weaponize this entire dynamic. When you see repeated messages, they eventually start to feel true, regardless of whether they're actually accurate or not. That repeated exposure creates familiarity. Familiarity creates a sense of comfort. And comfort? Well, comfort creates belief. We're now living in this incredibly strange psychological landscape, where people are increasingly questioning their own lived experiences, while blindly trusting automated systems they barely even understand. Modern society is in a constant, invisible battle for control over your perception. And remember, wherever perception becomes vulnerable, manipulation becomes possible.
Which brings us to our fifth and final section, a reflection on the story you choose to believe.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway from all of this is quite simple but heavy. Reality is not merely what happens. Reality is what we believe happened. It's a story we construct from memory, from emotion, from experience, and from interpretation. Most days, we just move through life assuming that story belongs entirely to us. But influence is constantly hovering in the background. It's woven into our relationships, our institutions, our media, our entire culture. And the most disturbing part of it all, it operates entirely without physical restraints. There are no visible chains. It's just the careful, quiet introduction of doubt.
The question really isn't whether this influence exists, it's whether or not you can actually recognize it. Somewhere in that gray area between certainty and doubt exists a highly fragile psychological space. It's a place where your reality can either remain completely your own or slowly, quietly become someone else's. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you to reflect on this one, deeply unsettling thought. When you look at the life you believe you are living, who is actually shaping your story?